Charles Lightoller had been known for many things, with most of all it being his actions during the night the RMS Titanic sunk in April 1912. If you were friends with Lightoller, you would know that he was a wise seaman with a quirky personality. He was a prankster and was a daredevil. Don't believe me? Just listen to the story of how he saved the lives of 130 men during Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk, and now he is a key factor in why the evacuation of Dunkirk is often called the miracle of Dunkirk. After a phony war that lasted just around 8 months, the UK had been getting angry with Sweden and Norway for importing iron ore into Germany, but they had no luck at stopping them. The UK was not happy with Nazi Germany and their constant breaking of rules, so they were doing everything they could to weaken Germany as much as they could, so no other countries could be affected by their rise in power. But obviously this had little to no effect on Adolf Hitler and Germany. Nazi Germany's temporary ally, the Soviet Union, invaded Finland, so the UK offered to land troops in Norway so they could travel across Sweden and help Finland. But Norway and Sweden rejected, because they were probably suspicious that the UK would take over all of their iron ore fields, which they would guess right. A desperate UK then set up minefields along Norway's coast to keep back any transport ships that were sending goods to Germany. Hitler, knowing what the Allies were up to, invaded Norway to secure his supply of iron ore. The Allies even came in to help Norway, but Hitler, unfortunately, claimed his win, and the Allies had no choice but to retreat. Germany's Luftwaffe was simply too much for Norway. Later on, when Winston Churchill had taken Neville Chamberlain's place, Hitler began his big plan, which was in a nutshell taking over the world, but first they needed to overtake France. Hitler invaded the Netherlands and Belgium to get around the Allies, France and UK, but the France and UK had been prepared. They went into Belgium trying to fight off the Nazis, but Hitler and his army had a plan. They would send thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then they went into a piece of land called the Ardennes that had no soldiers and walked right through it, surrounding the British troops all the way to Dunkirk. When the 338,000 troops were cut off and surrounded, BEF Commander General Viscount Gort immediately began a plan of withdrawal from Dunkirk. The final plan was to have the hundreds of thousands of soldiers sent to Dover, England, by boat. Dover had been the closest allied town to Dunkirk, and thus Operation Dynamo had started. Because the Royal Navy did not have enough vessels to transport 338,000 men to Dunkirk in the few days that they had, civilians were asked if their private vessels could be used by the military in the evacuation. Almost everyone let their boats be used, except for some. Charles Lightoller had helped out with the British Admiralty before. In 1939, when Lightoller was 65, he was ordered to spy on the German coastline and take photos and draw sketches. He brought his private motorboat, the Sundowner, along with his wife. During this mission, a German patrol boat had caught them not too far off the coast. Lightoller explained in his book once that his wife Sylvia had been on the deck knitting when she saw a German patrol boat steaming towards them. She shouted this warning to Lightoller, her husband. Lightoller quickly hid his photos and sketches and thought hard on what to do. When the German came onto the boat, they ordered to see the skipper, and right when the German ordered this to Sylvia, Lightoller's wife, Lightoller emerges from below decks with a gin bottle and a stagger in his steps. Lightoller stated in his book, the sight of the drunken 65-year-old sailor was enough for the Germans to leave shortly thereafter. He fooled them. When Lightoller was asked for his boat to be taken by a military man and used in the evacuation of Dunkirk, Lightoller, who had been dreading the loss of his youngest son who died in action a year earlier, insisted he should go on his own with his eldest son Roger. A younger Sea Scout named Gerald even tagged along with them. On the 1st of June 1940, Lightoller, his son, and the Sea Scout began to sail across the English Channel to Dunkirk. While crossing the channel, Lightoller's private yacht, the Sundowner, came across a small motorboat called the Westerly. The boat had been on fire, and Lightoller and the two other men went alongside the sinking vessel and picked up the survivors. The Westerly had about a few hundred gallons of gasoline on board, so Lightoller quickly got out of there. They saw the boat blow up as they got a quarter of a mile away from the site. Lightoller and the Sundowner came alongside the HMS Worcester, and Lightoller and his son Roger loaded up their motorboat with soldiers. The Sundowner, which had never carried over 21, had 130 men crammed above and below decks. The majority of the trip they were beside the HMS Worcester, and many machine gun firing coming from the German dive bombers of the Luftwaffe were taken down by the Worcester's machine guns and artillery fire. On the way back to England, and when they had backed off from the HMS Worcester, they were constantly under the threat of enemy aircraft. Thankfully, the large amount of crammed soldiers on the top decks was an extra sort of lookout. In one instance, an enemy plane took a dive for the Sundowner. Lightoller was once given information about aircraft tactics from his son, who sadly died just a year before during the beginning of the war. Lightoller used this useful piece of info on the enemy plane that was about to rake the decks of the Sundowner. With this useful info in Lightoller's brain, Lightoller knew that a plane had to elevate 10 to 20 feet before they could use their guns. With this in mind, Lightoller waited for the plane to rise, and once it did, Lightoller ordered his son at the helm to hard aport the motorboat. The Sundowner was quick on her helm, and Lightoller completely fooled the enemies. The aircraft went for a second attempt, but Lightoller ordered hard to starboard, and the pilot gave up after failing for the second time. Cheering on the decks of the Sundowner broke out. Lightoller, his son, and the Sea Scout that assisted him were just among one of the brave heroes who saved those 338,226 men those scary few days. 39 British Royal Navy destroyers, 4 Royal Canadian Navy destroyers, 3 French Navy destroyers, and around 700 civilian yachts, lifeboats, fishing boats, and skiffs came to the rescue. Even though it was a loss for the Allies, it was a situation that involved a lot of teamwork and collaborating that will never be forgotten.